Alex Rider Books, Chapter 7. By Sailor, by Sailors. The silver grey Mercedes SL600 cruised down the motorway, travelling south. Alex was sitting in the front passenger seat, with so much soft leather around him that he could barely hear the 389 horsepower, 6-liter engines that was carrying him towards the sail complex near Port Talon, Cornwall. But at 80 miles per hour, the engine was only idling. Alice could feel the power of the car. 100,000 pounds worth of German engineering. One touch from the thin, unsmiling chauffeur and the Mercedes would leap forward. This was a car that sneered at speed limits. Alex had been collected that morning from a converted church in Hampstead, North London. This was where Felix Lesson lived. When the driver had arrived, Alex had been waiting with his luggage, and there'd even been a woman, an MI6 operative, kissing him, telling him to clean his teeth, waving goodbye. As far as the driver was concerned, Alex was Felix. That morning, Alex had read through the file and knew that Lester went to a school called St. Anthony's, had 2 sisters and a pet Labrador. His father was an architect. His mother designed jewellery. A happy family. His family, if anybody asked. How far is it to Port Talon? He asked. So far, the driver had barely spoken a word. He answered Alex without looking at him. A few hours. You want some music? Got any John Lennon? That wasn't his choice. According to the file, Felix likes John Lennon. No. Forget it. I'll have some sleep. He needed the sleep. He was still exhausted from the training, and wondered how he would explain all the half-healed cuts and bruises if anyone saw under his shirt. Maybe he'd tell them he got bullied at school. He closed his eyes and allowed the leather to suck him into sleep. It was the feeling of the car slowing down that woke him up. He opened his eyes and saw a fishing village, the blue sea beyond a swathe of rolling green hills and a cloudless sky. It was a picture of a jigsaw puzzle, or perhaps a holiday brochure advertising forgotten England. Seagulls swooped and cried overhead. An old tug, tangled nets, smoke and flapping paint, pulled into the quay. A few locals, fishermen and their wives, stood around watching. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the village was caught in the silvery, fragile light that comes at the end of a perfect day. Port Talon, the driver said. He must have noticed that Alex had opening his eyes. It's pretty. Not if you're a fish. They drove round the edge of the village and back inland, down a lane that twisted between strangely bumpy fields. Alex saw the ruins of buildings, half-crumbling chimneys and rustling metal wheels, and knew that he was looking at an old tin mine. They'd mined tin in Cornwall for 3,000 years until one day the tin had run out. Now all that was left were the holes. A couple of kilometres down the lane, a linked metal fence sprang up. It was brand new, 10 metres high, topped with razor wire. Arc lamps and on scaffolding towers stood at regular intervals. And there were huge signs, red on white. You could have read them from the next country. Sail enterprises, strictly private. Trespassers will be shot. Alex muttered to himself. He remembered what Miss Jones had told him. He's more or less got his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Well, that was certainly his own first impression. The whole complex was somehow shocking, alien to the sloping hills and fields. The car reached the main gate, where there was a security cabin and an electronic barrier. A guard in a blue and grey uniform, with C's printed on his jacket, waved them through. The barrier lifted automatically, and then they were following along straight road over a stretch of land that had somehow been hammered flat with an airstrip on one side and a cluster of 4 high-tech buildings on the other. The buildings were large smoked glass and steel, each one joined to the next by a covered walkway. There were 2 aircraft next to the landing strip, a helicopter and a small cargo plane. Alex was impressed. The whole complex must have been about 5 kilometers square. It was quite an operation. The Mercedes came to a roundabout with a fountain at the centre, swept round it, and continued up towards a fantastic, sprawling house. It was Victorian, red brick topped with copper domes and spires that had long ago turned green. There must have been at least 60 windows on 5 floors facing the drive. It was a house that just didn't know when to stop. The Mercedes pulled up at the main entrance, and the driver got out. "Follow me!" "What about my luggage?" Alex asked. "It'll be brought." Alex and the driver went through the front door and into the hall dominated by a huge canvas. Judgment Day, the end of the world, painted 4 centuries ago as a swirling mass of doomed souls and demons. There were works of art everywhere. Watercolors and oils, prints, drawings, sculptures in stone and bronze, all crowded together with nowhere for the eye to rest. Alex followed the driver along a carpet so thick that he almost bounced. He was beginning to feel claustrophobic and was relieved when they passed through a door and into a vast room that was practically bare. "Mr. Sayer will be here shortly," the driver said, and left. Alex looked around him. This was a modern room with a curving steel desk near the centre, carefully positioned. Halogen lights and a spiral staircase leading down from a perfect circle cut in the ceiling above. One entire wall consisted of a single sheet of glass, and walking over to it, Alex realised that he was looking at a gigantic aquarium. The sheer size of the thing drew him towards it. It was hard to imagine how many thousands of litres of water the glass held back, but he was surprised to see that the tank was empty. There were no fish, although it was big enough to hold a shark. And then something moved in turquoise shadows, and Alex gasped with a mixture of horror and wonder as the biggest jellyfish he had ever seen drifted into view. The main body of the creature was a shimmering, pulsating mass of white and mauve, shaped rounding like a cone. Beneath it, a mass of tentacles covered with circular stingers, twisted in the water at least 10 meters long. As the jellyfish moved, or drifted in an artificial current. Its tentacle in an artificial current. Its tentacles writhed against the glass, so that looked almost as if it was trying to break out. It was the single most awesome and repulsive thing Alex had ever seen. Physalia. The voice came from behind him, and Alex twisted around to see a man coming down the last of the stairs. Herod's sail was short. He was so short that Alex's first impression was that he was looking at a reflection that had somehow been distorted. In his immaculate and expensive black suit, with gold signet ring and brightly polished black shoes, he looked like a scaled-down model of a multi-millionaire businessman. His skin was very dark, so that his teeth flashed when he smiled. He had a round, bald head and very horrible eyes. The grey irises were too small, completely surrounded by white. Alex was reminded of tadpoles before they hatched. When Sale stood next to him, his eyes were almost at the same level, and his head less warmth than jellyfish. Less warmth than the jellyfish. The Portuguese man I wore, Sale continued. He had a heavy accent brought with him. From the berry market. It's beautiful, don't you think? I wouldn't keep one as a pet, Alex said. I came upon this one when I was diving in the South China Sea. Sale gestured at a glass display case, and Alex noted 3 harpoon guns and a collection of knives resting in velvet slots. I love to kill fish, Sale went on, but when I saw this specimen of Physalia physalis, I knew I had to capture it and keep it. You see, it reminds me of myself. It's 99% water. It has no brains. It has no guts. It has no anus. Alex had dredged up the facts from somewhere and spoken them before. He knew what he was doing. Sale glanced at him, then turned back to the creature hovering over him in its tank. It's an outsider, he said. It drifts on its own, ignored by the other fish. It is silent, and yet it demands respect. You see the nematocysts, Mr. Lester, the stinging cells. Mr. Lester, you see the nematocysts, Mr. Lester, you see stinging cells. If you were to find yourself wrapped in one of those, it would be an cruciate death. Call me Alex, Alex said. He meant to say Felix, but somehow it had slipped out. It was the most stupid, the most amazing, amateurish mistake he could have made. But he had been thrown by the way. Sale had appeared, and by the slow, hypnotic dance of the jellyfish, the grey eyes squirmed. I thought your name was Felix. My friends call me Alex. Why? After Alex Ferguson. I'm a big fan of Manchester United, and he was the best manager they ever had. It was the first thing Alex could think of, but he'd seen a football poster in Felix Lester's bedroom and knew, well, at least he'd chosen the right team. Sail smiled. That's the most amusing, Alex. It shall be. And I hope we will be friends, Alex. You are a very lucky boy. You won the competition and you are going to be the first teenager to try out my Stormbreaker. But this is also lucky. I think for me. I want to know what you think of it. I want you to tell me what you like, what you don't. His eyes dipped away and suddenly he was businesslike. We only have 3 days until the launch. He said we better get a bloody move on, as my father used to say. I'll have my man take you to your room, and tomorrow morning, first thing, you must get to work. There's a maths program you should try, also languages. All the software was developed here at Sail Enterprises. Of course, we've talked to children, we've gone to teachers, to education experts, but you, my dear Alex, you will be worth more to me than all of them put together. As he had talked, Sail had become more and more animated, carried away by his own enthusiasm. He had become a completely different man. Alex had to admit that he'd taken an immediate dislike to Horowitz Sail. No wonder Blunt and the people at MI6 mistrusted him. But now he was forced to think again. He was standing opposite one of the richest men in England. A man who had decided out of the goodness of his heart to give a huge gift to British schools. Just because he was small and slimy. That didn't necessarily make him an enemy. Perhaps Blunt was wrong after all. Ah, here's my man now, Sail said. And about bloody time. The door had opened and a man had come in dressed in a black suit and tails of an old-fashioned butler. He was as tall and thin as his master was short and round, with a thatch of ginger hair above a face so pale it was almost paper white. From a distance, it had looked as if he was smiling. But he drew closer. Alex gasped. The man had 2 horrendous scars, one on each side of his mouth, twisting up all the way to his ears. It was as if someone had attempted to cut his face in half. The scars were a gruesome shade of mauve. They were smaller, fainter scars where his cheeks had once been stitched. This is Mr. Gwyn, Sail said. He changed his name after his accident. Accident? Alex found it hard not to stare at the terrible wound. Mr. Gwyn used to work in a circus. It was novelty knife throwing act. For the climax, he used to catch a spinning knife between his teeth. But then one night, his elderly mother came to see the show. She waved to him from the front row, and he got his timing wrong. He's worked for me for 12 years now, and although his appearance made me displeasing, he is loyal and efficient. Don't try to talk with him, by the way. He has no tongue. Mr. Gwyn said. Nice to meet you, Alex muttered. Take him to the blue room, Sail commanded. He turned to Alex. You're fortunate that one of our nicest rooms has come up free. Here in the house, we have a security man staying there, but He left us quite suddenly. Oh, where was that? Alex asked casually. I have no idea. One moment he was here, the next he was gone. Sale smiled again. I hope you won't do the same, Alex. We were. Mr. Green gestured at the door and leaving Herod Sale standing in the front of his huge captive. Alex left the room. Walking past, these were security guards dressed in the same uniform as the man at the gate. They were both carrying semi-automatic machine guns, not just a private army, but a well-armed one too. He got into the bed. The last person who had slept here had been his uncle, Iron Rider. Had he seen something looking out of the window? Had he heard something? What could have happened that meant he had to die? Sleep took a long time coming to the dead man's bed. Chapter 8. Looking for trouble. Alex saw it the moment he opened his eyes. It would have been obvious to anyone who stepped in the bed because, of course, nobody had slept there. Because, of course, nobody had slept there since Iron Rider had been killed. It was a triangle of white slipped into a fold in the canopy above the four-poster bed. You had to be lying on your back to see it, like Alex was now. It was out of his reach. He had to balance the chair on the mattress and then stand on the chair to reach it. Wobbling, almost falling, he finally managed to trap it between his fingers and pull it out. In fact, it was a square of paper folded twice. Someone had drawn it a strange design with what looked like a reference number beneath it. L475/19 bracket. There wasn't very much to it, but Alex recognized Iron Rider's handwriting. But what did he mean? Well, what did it mean? He pulled on some clothes, went over to the table, and took out a sheet of plain paper. Quickly, he wrote a brief message in block capitals. Found this in Iron Rider's room. Can you make any sense of it? Then he found his Nintendo DS. Inserted the Nemesis cartridges at the back, turned it on, and then passed the bottom screen over the two sheets of paper, scanning first his message, and then the design. In a matter of microseconds, the image would appear on the screen of Miss Jones's computer in London, along with the time and the location from which it had been sent. Maybe she could work it out. She was, after all, meant to work for intelligence. Finally, Alex turned off the Nintendo. They removed the back and hid the folded paper in the battery compartment. The diagram had to be important. Iron Rider had hidden it. Maybe it was what had cost him his life. There was a knock at the door. Alex went over and opened it. Mr. Grimm was standing outside, still wearing his butler's out uniform. Good morning, Alex said. Girl! Mr. Grimm gestured, and Alex followed him back down the corridor and out of the house. He felt relieved to be out in the air, away from all the artwork. And they paused in front of the fountain. There was a sudden roar, and a propeller-driven cargo plane dipped down over the roof, and the house landed on the runway. If Gringly Guy, Mr. Grimm explained. Just as I thought, Alex said. They reached the first of the modern buildings, and Mr. Grimm had pressed his hand against the glass plate next to the door. There was a green glow as his fingerprints were red. Ooh. I lost what I was sorry about that. As his fingerprints were red. And a moment later, the door slid soundlessly open. Everything was different on the other side of the door. From the art and the elegance of their main house, Alex could have stepped into the next century. Long white corridors with metallic floors, halogen lights, the unnatural chill of air, conditions, another world. A woman was waiting for him, broad-shouldered and server, her blonde hair twisted into the tightest of buns. She had strangely blank, moon face shaped. She had strange moon-shaped face. Moon-shaped face. Very strange with the moon shape. Moon shapes reminds me of the moon since it has the word moon in it. And a moon-shaped face. You must be wire frame spectacles and no makeup apart from a smear of yellow lipstick. She wore a white coat with a name tag pinned to the top pocket. It read Vol. You must be Felix, she said, or is it now I understand, Alex? Yes. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Fraulein Vol. She had a thick German accent. You may call me Nadia. She could answer Mr. Grim. I will take him from here. Mr. Grim nodded and left the building. Do you have a mobile? Vol asked, holding out her hand. Sure. Alex handed it across. I'm afraid I will be keeping it until the end of your visit. A security measure, you understand? She slipped it into her pocket. Alex was sorry to see him go. Not being allowed a phone at school was bad enough, but here in the middle of sales compound, he felt lost without it. But too late. Nadia Vol. Sorry, I lost it again. Lady Vol had already set off talking as she went. We have four blocks here. Block A, where we are now, is administration and recreation. Block B is software development. Block C is research and storage. Block D is where the main Stormbreaker assembly line is found. Where's breakfast? Alex asked. You have more Ethan? I will send you a sandwich. Herr Sell is very keen for you to begin at once with the experienced. She walked like a soldier, back straight, her feet in black leather shoes, rapping against the floor. Alex followed her through a door and into a bare, square room with a chair and a desk, and on the desk, the first actual Stormbreaker he had ever seen. It was a beautiful machine. The iMac might have been the first computer with a real sense of design, but the Stormbreaker had far surpassed it. It was black apart from the white lightning bolt down one side, and the screen could have been a porthole in outer space. Alex sat behind the desk and turned it on. The computer booted itself instantly. A fork of animated lightning sliced across the screen. There was a swirl of clouds, and then, in burning red letters, CE. The logo of Cell Enterprises formed itself. Seconds later, the desktop appeared, with icons ready for maths, science, French, every subject ready to be accessed. Even in those brief seconds, Alex could feel the speed and the power of the computer. and Horowitz sale was going to put one in every school in the country. He had to admire the man. It was an incredible gift. "I'll leave you here," Fraulein Roll said. "It is better for you, I think, to explore the Stormbreaker on your own. You will have dinner with Herr Sale, and you will tell him your feeling." "Yeah, I'll tell him my feeling. I will have a sandwich sent in to you, but I must ask you please not to leave the room. There is, you understand, the security." "Whatever you say, Miss Vole," Alex said. The woman left. Alex opened one of the programs, and for the next 3 hours lost himself in the state of the art software of the Stormbreaker. Even when his sandwich arrived, he ignored it, letting it curl on the plate. He would never have said that schoolwork was fun, but he had to admit that the computer made it lively. The history program brought the Battle of Port Stanley to life with music and video clips. How to extract oxygen from water. The science program did it in front of his eyes. The Stormbreaker, he managed to make geometry almost bearable, which more than Miss Donovan at Brookland had ever done. Next time Alex looked at his watch, it was 1 o'clock. He had been in the room for over 4 hours. He dressed and stood up. Nadia Vole had told him not to leave, but if there were any secrets to be found at Cell Enterprises, he wasn't going to find them here. He walked over to the door and was surprised to find that it opened as he approached. He went out into the corridor. There was nobody in sight. Time to move. Block A was administration and recreation. Alex passed a number of offices, then a blank, white-tiled cafeteria. There were about 40 men and women, all in white coats and identity tags, sitting and talking animatedly over their lunches. It was a good time. Nobody passed him. As he continued through a plexiglass, walked into Block B. There were computer screens everywhere, glowing in cramped offices piled high with papers and printouts. Software development. Through to Block C. Research. Past the library with endless shelves of books and hard drives. Alex ducked in. It ducked in behind a shelf as 2 technicians walked past, talking together. He was out of bounds on his own, snooping around without any idea of what he was looking for. Trouble, probably. What else could there be to find? He walked softly, casually down the corridor, heading for the last block. A murmur of voices reached him. He quickly stepped in an alcove, squatting down beside a drinking fountain as 2 men and women walked past, all wearing white coats, arguing about web servers. Overhead he noticed a security camera swiveling towards him. In another 5 seconds it would be on him, but he still had to wait until the 3 technicians had gone before he could sprint forward. Just ahead of the wide angle lens. Had it seen him? Alex couldn't be sure, but he did know one thing. He was running out of time. Maybe the Vole woman would have checked up on him already. Maybe someone would have brought lunch to the empty room. If he were going to find anything, it would have to be soon. Yet he started along the glass passage that joined the blocks C and D. And here at last there was something different. The corridor split in half, with a metal staircase leading down into what would have been a sort of basement. And although every building and every door he had seen so far had been labelled. The staircase was blank. The light stopped about halfway down. It was almost as if the stairs were trying not to get themselves noticed. The clang of fate on metal. Alex shrank back. And a moment later, Mr. Gwyn appeared, rising off the floor like a vampire on a bad day, as the sun hit his dead white face. His scars twitched and he blinked several times before walking off into Block D. What had he been doing? Where did the stairs go? Alex hurried down them. It was like stepping into a morgue. The air conditioning was so strong that he could feel it on his forehead and on the palms of his hands, fast freezing his sweat. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He was in another long passageway stretching back under the complex. The way he had come, it led to a single metal door. But there was something very strange. The walls of the passage, they were unfinished. Dark brown rock with streaks of what looks like zinc or some other metal. The floor was also rough, and the way was lit by old-fashioned bulbs hanging on wires. It all reminded him of something he had seen very recently, but he couldn't remember what. Somehow Alex knew that the door at the end of the passage would be locked. It looked as if it had been locked forever. Like the stairs, it was not labelled, and somehow it seemed too small to be important. But Mr. Gwyn had just come up the stairs. There was only one place he could have come from, and that was the other side. The door had to lead somewhere. He reached it and tried the handle. It wouldn't move. He pressed his ear against the metal and listened. Nothing. Unless, was he imagining it? A sort of throbbing, a pump or something like it. Alex would have given anything to see through the metal. And suddenly he realized that he could. The Nintendo was in his pocket. He took it out, inserted the exo cartridge, turned it on and held it flat against the door. The top screen flickered into life. A tiny window through the metal door. Alex was looking into a large room. There was something tall and barrel-shaped in the middle of it, and there were people, ghost-like, were smudges on the screen. They were moving back and forth. Some of them were carrying objects, flat and rectangular, and trays of some sort. There seemed to be a desk to one side, piled with apparatus. Piled with apparatus that he couldn't make out. Alex pressed the B button, trying to zoom in, but the room was too big. Everything was too far away. He fumbled in his pocket and took out the earphones, still holding the Nintendo against the door. He pressed the wire into the socket and slipped the earphones over his head. If he couldn't see, at least he might be able to hear. And sure enough, the voices came through. Faint and disconnected, but audible through the powerful speaker system built into the machine. In place. We have 24 hours. It's not enough. It's all we have. They come in tonight at 0200. Alex didn't recognize any of the voices, amplified by the tiny machine. They sounded like a phone call from abroad on a very bad line. Gwyn overseeing the delivery. It's still not enough time. And then they were gone. Alex tried to piece together what he had heard. Something was being delivered 2 hours after midnight. Mr. Gwyn was arranging the delivery. But what? Why? Had he just turned off the Nintendo and put it back into his pocket when he heard behind him the squeak of a shoe that told him he was no longer alone? He turned around and found himself facing Nadia Vole. Alex realized that she had tried to sneak up on him. She had known he was down here. "What are you doing, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was poisoned honey. "Nothing," Alex said. "I asked you to stay in the computer room." "Yes, but I've been there all morning. I need a break." "And you came down here?" "I saw stairs. I thought they might lead to the toilet." There was a long silence. Behind him, Alex could still hear or feel the sobbing from the secret room. The woman nodded as if she had decided to accept the story. "There is nothing down here," she said. "This door leads only to the generator room." "Please," she suggested. "I will take you back to the main house, yes? And later you must prepare for dinner with Herr Cell. He wishes to know your first impressions of the Stormbreaker." Alex walked past her and back towards the stairs. It was certain of two things. The first was Nadia Vole was lying. This was no generator room. She was hiding something, and she hadn't believed him either. One of the cameras must have spotted him, and she had been sent to find him. So she knew that he was lying to her. Not a good start. Alex reached the staircase and climbed up into the light, feeling the woman's eyes like daggers stabbing into his back. Last chapter, I think. Chapter 9. Night Visitors. Harold Sale was playing snooker when Alex was shown back into the room with the jellyfish. It was hard to say quiet when the heavy wooden snooker table had come from. And Alex couldn't avoid thinking that little man looked slightly ridiculous. Almost lost at the far end of the green maze, Mr. Grin was with him carrying a footstool with sails turned on for each shot. Otherwise he would barely have been able to reach over the edge. "Ah, good evening, Phoenix, or of course I mean Alex," Sale exclaimed. "Do you play snooker?" "Occasionally. How would you like to play against me? There are only 2 reds left." "Then the colours. But I'm ready to bet that you don't manage to score a single point." How much? Ha 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 ha. Suppose I want to bet you £10 a point." "As much as that?" Alex looked surprised. "To a man like myself, £10 is nothing." "Why, I could quite happily bet you £100 a point." Then why don't you? But there was still a direct challenge. Sale gazed thoughtfully at Alex. "Very well," he said. £100 a point. Why not? I like a gamble. My father was a gambling man. I thought he was a hairdresser." "Who told you that?" Suddenly Alex cursed himself. Why was he more careful when he was with this man? Why was he no more careful when he was with this man? I read it in a paper, he said. "My dad got me some stuff to read about you when I won the competition." £100 a point then, but don't expect to get rich. So hit the white, sending one of the reds straight into the middle pocket. The jellyfish floated past us, watching the game from its tank. Mr. Grin picked up the footstool and moved it around the table. Sale laughed briefly and followed the butler around, already seizing up the next shot. A fairly tricky black in the corner. "So what does your father do?" he said. "He's an architect," Alex said. "Oh yes, what does he design?" The question was casual, but Alex wondered if he was being tested. He'd been working on an office in Soho. Alex said. Before that, he did an art gallery in Aberdeen. Yes, Sale climbed onto the footstool and aimed. The black missed the corner pocket by a fraction or a millimetre, spinning back into the centre. Sale frowned. That was your bloody fault, he snapped at Mr. Gwyn. Wow! Your shadow was on the table. Never mind. He turned to Alex. You've been unlucky. None of the balls will go in. You won't make any money this time. Alex pulled the cue out of the rack and glanced at the table. Sale was right. The last red was too close to the cushion. But in snooker, there were other ways to win points, and Alex knew only too well. It was one of the many games he had played with Iron Rider. The two of them had even belonged to a club in Chelsea, and Alex had represented the junior team. This was something he had mentioned to Sale. He carefully aimed at the red, then hit. Perfect. Nowhere near. Sale was back at the table before the balls stopped rolling, but he had spoken too soon. He stared at the white ball as the white ball hit the cushion and rolled behind the pink. He'd been snookered for about 20 seconds. He measured up the angles, breathing through his nose. You've had bitty luck, he said. You seem to have accidentally snookered me. Now let me see. He concentrated. Then hit the white, trying to curve around the pink, but once again he was about a millimetre. There was an audible click as it touched the pink. Foul shot, Alex said. 6 points to me. Does that mean I get £600? What? The foul is worth 6 points to me. At £100 a point? Yes. Saliva flecked Sale's lips. He was staring at the table as if he couldn't believe what had happened. His shot had exploded the red ball. It was an easier shot into the top corner, and Alex took it without hesitating. Another 100 makes 700, he said. He moved down the table, rushing past Mr. Gwyn. Quickly, he judged the angles. Yes, he got a perfect kiss on the black, sending it into the corner with the white, spinning back for a good angle on the yellow. £1,400 plus another 200 when he dropped the yellow immediately afterwards. Sale could only watch in disbelief as Alex pocketed the green, the brown, the blue and the pink in that order, and then down the full length of the table, the black. I'll make that £4,100, Alex said. He made down the cue. Thank you very much. Sale's face had gone the colour of the last ball, which is pink. I made a 4,100. He put down the cue. Thank you very much. Sale's face had gone the colour of the last ball. 4,000. I wouldn't have gambled if I had known you were this bloody good, he said. He went over to the wall and pressed the button. Part of the floor slid back into the entire pool table, disappeared, carried down by a horrific lift. When the floor slid back, there was no sign that it had ever been there. It was a neat trick, the toy of a man with money to burn. But Sale was no longer in the mood for games. He threw his billiard cue over to Mr. Gwyn, hurling it almost like a javelin. The butler's hands flickered out and caught it. Let's eat, Sale said. The two of them sat at opposite ends of a long glass table in the room next door while Mr. Grimm served smoked salmon, then some sort of stew. Alex drank water. Sale, who had cheered up once again, had a glass of vintage red wine. You spent some time with Stormbreaker today? Yeah, he asked. Yes. And it's great, Alex said, and meant it. He still found it hard to believe that this ridiculous man could have created anything so sleek as powerful. So which program did you use? History? Science? Maths? It's hard to believe, but I actually enjoyed them. Do you have any criticisms? Alex thought for a moment. I was surprised it didn't have 3D acceleration. The Stormbreaker is not intended for games. Did you consider a headset and integrated microphone? No, Sale nodded. It's a good idea. I'm sorry you've only come here for such a short time, Alex. Tomorrow we'll have to get you onto the internet. The Stormbreakers are connected to a master network controlled from here. It means they have free 24-hour accesses. That's cool. It's more than cool. Sale's eyes were far away. The grey irises, small dancing. Tomorrow we'll start by shipping the computers out, he said. They'll go by plane, by lorry and by boat. It'll take just one day for them to reach every point of the country. And then the day after at 12 o'clock noon, exactly the Prime Minister will honour me by pressing the start button, which will bring every one of my Stormbreakers online. At that moment, all the schools will be united. Think of that, Alex. Thousands of school children, hundreds of thousands sitting in front of the screens. Suddenly together, north, south, east and west. One school, one family. They will know me for what I am. He picked up his glass and emptied it. How is this the goat? He asked. I'm sorry. The stew? It's goat meat with spinach and lentils. It was the recipe of my mother's. She must have been an unusual woman. Horowitz Sale held out his glass and Mr. Grin refilled it. Sale was gazing at Alex curiously. You know, he said, I have a strange feeling that you and I have met before. I don't think so, but yes, your face is familiar to me. Mr. Grin, what do you think? The butler stood back with the wine, his dead white head twisted around to look at Alex. Eglag, he said. Yes, of course you're right. Eglag, Alex said. I'm Ryder, the security man I mentioned. You look a lot like him. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Don't know. Never met him. Alex could feel the danger getting closer. He told me he left suddenly. Yes, he was here to keep an eye on things. But if you ask me, he was never bloody good. Spent half his time in the village, in the port, the post office, the library, when he wasn't snooping around him. That is, of course, that's something else you have in common. I understand Frawley and Roll found you today. Sale's pupils crawled to the front of his eyes, trying to get closer to Alex. You were off limits. I got a bit lost, Alex shrugged, trying to make light of it. Well, I hope you don't want to go wandering again tonight. Security is very tight at the moment. And as you may have noticed, my men are all armed. I didn't think that was legal in Britain. We have a special license at any rate, Alex. I would advise you to go straight to your room after dinner and stay there. I would be inconsolable if you were accidentally shot and killed in the darkness. Although it would, of course, save me £4,000. Actually, I think you've forgotten to check you. You'll have it tomorrow. Maybe we can have dinner together? Mr. Green will be serving up one of my grandmother's recipes. More goat, dog. You've obviously had a family. You obviously had a family that loved animals. Only the edible ones, Salesmite smiled. And now I must wish you good night. At 1:30 in the morning, Alex's eyes blinked open, and he was instantly awake. He slipped out of bed and dressed quickly into his darkest clothes, then left the room. He was half surprised that the door was unlocked and the corridors seemed to be unmonitored, but this was after all Sale's private house, and any security would have designed to stop people coming in, not leaving. Sale had warned him not to leave the house, but the voices behind the metal door had spoken of something arriving at 2 o'clock. Alex had to know what it was. He found his way into the kitchen and tiptoed past a stretch of gleaming silver faces and an oversized American fridge. Let sleeping dogs lie, he thought to himself, remembering what was being served for tomorrow's dinner. There was a side door, fortunately with the key still in the lock. Alex turned it and let himself out. As a last-minute precaution, he locked the door and kept the key. Now, as at least he had a way back in. It was a soft grey night with a half moon, forming a perfect D in the sky. D for what? Alex wondered. Danger, discovery, or disaster? Only time would tell him. He took 2 steps forward, then froze. As the searchlight rolled past, centimetres away, directed from the tower he hadn't even seen. At the same time, he became aware of voices, and 2 guards walked slowly across the garden, patrolling the back of the house. They were both armed, and Alex remembered what Sale had said. An accidental shooting would save him £4,000, and given the importance of the Stormbreakers, would anyone just care? Would care just how accidental the shooting might have been? He waited until the men had gone, then took the opposite direction, running along the side of the house, ducking under the windows. He reached the corner and looked round. In the distance, the airstrip was lit up, and there were figures, more guards and technicians everywhere. One man he recognized walking past the fountain towards a waiting truck. He saw the gangly silhouetted against the lights. A black cutout, but Alex wanted to know Mr. Gwyn anyway. They come in tonight at 02:00. 9 visitors, and Mr. Gwyn was on his way to meet them. The butler had almost reached the truck, and Alex knew that if he waited any longer, he would be too late. Throwing caution to the wind, he left the cover of the house and ran into the open, trying to stay low and hoping his dark clothes would keep him invisible. He was only 5 meters from the truck when Mr. Gwyn suddenly stopped and turned around, as if he had sensed there was someone there. There was nowhere for Alex to hide. He did the only thing he could and threw himself flat on the ground, burying his face in the grass. He counted slowly to 5 and looked up. Mr. Gwyn was turning once again. A second figure had appeared. Nadia Vole. It seemed she would be driving. She muttered something as she climbed into the front. Mr. Gwyn grunted and nodded. By the time Mr. Gwyn had walked round to the passenger door, Alex was once again up and running. He reached the back of the truck just as it began to move. It was similar to trucks he had seen at the SAS camp. It would have been army surplus. The back was tall and square, covered with tarpaulin. Alex clambered onto the moving tailgate and threw himself in. He was only just in time, even as it hit the floor. A car started up behind him, flooding the back of the truck with its headlamps. If it had waited even a few seconds more, he would have seen in all a convey of five vehicles left Sale Enterprises. The truck Alex was in was the last but one, as well as Mr. Gwyn and Lady Vole, and at least a dozen uniformed guards were making the journey. But where? To where? Alex didn't dare look out the back, not with the car right behind him. He felt the truck slow down as they reached the main gate, and then they were out on the main road, driving rapidly uphill, away from the village. Alex saw the journey without seeing it. He was thrown across the metal floor as they sped round hairpin bends, and he only knew that they had left the main road when he suddenly found himself being bounced up and down. The truck was moving more slowly. He sensed they were going downhill, following a rough track, and now he could hear something, even over the noise of the engine waves that had come down from the sea. The trucks stopped. There was the opening and the slamming of car doors, the scrunches of boots and rocks, low voices talking. Alex crouched down, afraid that one of the guards would throw back the tarpaulin and discover him, but the voices faded and found himself once again alone. Fortunately, he slipped out the back. He was right. The convoy had parked on a deserted beach. Looking back, he could see a track leading down from the road, which twisted up over the cliffs. Mr. Gwyn and the others had gathered beside an old stone jetty that stretched out into the black water. He was carrying a torch. Alex saw him swing it in an arc. Growing ever more curious, Alex crept forward and found a hiding place behind a cluster of boulders. It seemed they were waiting for a boat. He looked at his watch. It was exactly 2 o'clock. He almost wanted to laugh. Give the men flintlock pistols and horses, and they could have come straight out of a children's book, smuggling on the Cornish coast. Could that be what this was all about? Cocaine or Mary Joanna coming in from the continent? Why else would they be here in the middle of the night? The question was answered a few seconds later. Alex stared, unable to believe quite what he was seeing. A submarine, and it had a submarine. A submarine. It had emerged. Emerged from where? He had emerged from the sea with the speed and impossibility of a huge stage illusion. One moment there was nothing, and then it was there in front of him, ploughing through the sea towards the jetty. Its engines making no sound. Water streaking off its silver casing and churning right behind him. The submarine had no markings, but Alex thought he recognized the shape of diving planes slashing horizontally through the conning tower and a shark's tail rudder at the back. A Chinese hand-class 404 SSN, nuclear-powered, armed men also with nuclear weapons. But what was it doing here, off the coast of Cornwall? What was going on? The tower opened and a man climbed out, stretching himself in the cold. Whoa. It's cold morning air, even without a half moon. Alex would have recognized the sleek dancer's body and the close-cropped hair of the man whose photograph he had only seen a few days before. It was Yasin Gregorovich, the contract killer, the man who had murdered Iron Rider. He was dressed in grey overalls. He was smiling. Yasin Gregorovich had supposedly met sail in Cuba. Now he was here in Cornwall. So the two of them were working together, but why? Why would Stormbreaker project need a man like him? Nadia Vole walked to the end of the jetty, and Yasin climbed down to join her. They spoke for a few minutes, but even assuming they were speaking in English, there was no chance of their being overheard. Meanwhile, the guards from the Sail Enterprise had formed a line stretching back, almost to the point where the vehicles were parked. Yasin gave an order, and as Alex watched from behind the rocks, a large metallic silver box with a vacuum seal appeared, held by unseen hands. At the top of the submarine's tower, Yasen himself passed it down to the first of the guards. He then passed it back up the line. About 40 more boxes followed, one after another. It took almost an hour to unload the submarine. The men handled the boxes carefully. They didn't want to break whatever was inside. At 3 o'clock, they were almost finished. The boxes were now being packed in the back of the truck that Alex had vacated, and that was when it happened. One of the men standing on the jetty dropped one of the boxes. He wanted to catch it again at the last minute, but even so, it banged down heavily on the stone surface. Everyone stopped instantly. It was as if a switch had been thrown, and Alex could almost feel the roar of fear in the air. Yasin was the first to recover. He darted forward along the jetty road like a cat, his feet making no sound. He reached the box and ran his hands over it, checking the seal, then nodded slowly. The metal wasn't even dented. With everyone else so still, Alex heard the exchange that followed. "It's okay, I'm sorry," said the guard's head. "It's not damaged and I won't do it again." No, you won't," Yasin agreed, and shot him. The bullet spat out of his hand, red in the dark menace. It hit the man in the chest, propelling him backwards in an awkward cartwheel. The man fell into the sea. For a few seconds he looked up at the moon as if trying to admire it one last time. Then the black water folded over him. It took them another 20 minutes to load the truck. Yasin got into the front with Nadia. Well, Mr. Gwyn went into one of the cars. Alex had time to time his return carefully as the truck picked up speed, rumbling back up towards the road. He left the cover of the rocks, ran forward, and pulled himself in. There was hardly any room, but he managed to find a hole and squeeze himself into it. He ran a hand over one of the boxes. It was about the size of a tea chest, unmarked and cold to touch. He tried to find a way to open it, but it was locked in a way he did not understand. He looked back out of the truck. The beach and the jetty were already far below them. The submarine was putting out to sea. One moment it was there, sleek and silver, gliding through the water. Then it sunk below the surface, disappearing as quickly as a bad dream. Right, everyone, that'll be the end of me reading you this book, okay? So bye, everyone, and thank you for listening to the third time me reading you Alex Rider books.